They didn't announce themselves like conquerors usually do. No grand armadas screaming through hyperspace. No diplomatic probes. No warning broadcasts to lesser civilizations. Just a single, polite message embedded into every human communication network on the same night the sky turned wrong. We have arrived to correct a developing anomaly. That was it. No demands. No negotiation. Then the bombs fell. Not nuclear. Not chemical. Not anything humanity had ever prepared for in its worst-case scenarios. These were precision planetfall strikes. Objects dropped from orbit that didn't explode so much as rewrite matter. Cities didn't burn. They simply stopped existing, replaced by smooth, glass-like scars that reflected the sky like a wound that refused to close. In under 40 minutes, every major capital was gone. Washington, Moscow, Delhi, Sao Paulo, Tokyo. Gone. The aliens called themselves the Varelian Accord, and their logic was simple: remove the apex species before it becomes a threat. Humanity, in their calculations, was an unsolved equation that needed deletion. What they didn't account for was how humans respond when the equation turns hostile. Deep underground, buried beneath layers of reinforced concrete and old political paranoia, something older than the invasion protocol came alive. General Marcus Havel didn't panic. He watched the satellite feed until it died. Then he turned to the room full of surviving officers, analysts, and engineers and said one thing. So, they finally showed up. No one asked who. They already knew. Dr. Lena Cade stood at the far end of the command bunker, arms crossed, face unreadable. She wasn't military. She wasn't supposed to be there. Which meant she was exactly where she needed to be. They're efficient, she said quietly, watching another city disappear on the screen. I'll give them that. A young officer snapped. Millions are dead. Cade didn't even look at him. Yes, she replied. And they'll assume that breaks us. Havel exhaled slowly. Does it? That earned a faint smile from her. No, she said. It confirms something. The bunker fell silent. Havel finally turned to her. Say it. Cade's eyes reflected the dim red emergency lighting. That we've been right to prepare for this for the last 80 years. A low murmur spread through the room. Uneasy. Tense. Half disbelief, half dread. Havel rubbed his jaw. We're not ready. Cade shook her head. No, she corrected. We're not deployed. Above them, the Varelian fleet hung in orbit like a crown of cold stars. Elegant ships. Silent. Unblinking. Their commander, known only as Executor Rail, watched Earth's collapse with clinical satisfaction. Resistance levels? He asked. A technician responded instantly. Minimal. Their infrastructure is fragmented. Military response is disorganized. No unified counterattack detected. Rail tilted his head slightly. Predictable. Another officer added. Their species appears emotionally unstable. High distress signals. Civil unrest escalating. Rail allowed a faint gesture of approval. Then the correction proceeds as planned. But then something unusual appeared on the tactical display. A signal. Not military. Not governmental. Something buried. Something old. Trace that, Rail ordered. The technician hesitated. It's coming from underground. Multiple continents. Deep subsurface structures. Rail's tone sharpened. Weapons? No, Executor. It appears to be awakening. Deep beneath the ruins of what used to be Europe, something metallic shifted for the first time in decades. Not machinery. Not quite. Something waiting. In the bunker, alarms began to pulse, but not the alien ones. Human ones. Red lights flickered across sealed doors that hadn't opened in generations. Havel stared at the readings. Oh, he said quietly. Cade finally looked up. They're early, she murmured. Havel turned to her. Early for what? Cade's expression didn't change. For making first contact the hard way. A distant rumble rolled through the earth, not from impact, but from movement below. Something massive was rising. And above them, in orbit, Executor Rail finally noticed the second anomaly. Not resistance. Not defense. But preparation completing itself. He narrowed his eyes. "Deploy atmospheric sensors," he ordered. "I want everything that planet has left." The technician swallowed. "Executor, I don't think it has been showing us everything." On Earth, deep beneath the ashes of the first bombardment, doors older than modern nations slid open for the first time. And inside them, humanity's real answer to extinction took a breath. Executor Rail had seen resistance before. Rebellions. Insurgencies. Civilizations clinging to dying worlds with primitive weapons and desperate courage. This was not that. This was silence with structure. The planet below did not respond to the bombardment the way it should have. No mass military launches. No frantic counterstrikes. No unified planetary broadcast begging for mercy or negotiation. Instead, Earth behaved like a body that had already decided where the wound would be, and was now preparing surgery around it. "Surface scans," a technician reported, voice tightening. "No coordinated military buildup detected." Rail's mandibles flexed slightly. "Then what are they doing?" A pause. "Then, we're detecting synchronized energy signatures underground. Multiple continents. Depths exceeding known industrial capability." Another officer leaned in. "Civilian infrastructure?" "No," the technician said slowly. "This is not civilian." Rail stepped closer to the holographic display. Lines of red pulsed beneath the planet like a second nervous system awakening. "Magnify." The image deepened. What they saw should not have been possible. Beneath ruined cities, beneath oceans and mountain ranges, vast geometric structures unfolded. Not carved. Not built in any conventional sense. Organized. Like the planet itself had been hollowed and repurposed. Rail's voice dropped. "How long?" The technician hesitated. "Executor, some of these structures predate their recorded industrial age." That caused a ripple of unease across the command deck. "You are saying," Rail said carefully, "they were prepared before spaceflight?" No one answered quickly enough. On Earth, deep beneath the shattered crust of what used to be Central Asia, a vault the size of a small city finished unlocking. Hydraulic seals released pressure that hadn't moved in 73 years. And something inside finally remembered it was allowed to exist. General Marcus Havel stood in the command bunker watching the global subsurface map come alive like a dying star reversing its collapse. He didn't look surprised. Just tired. "You really kept all of this hidden," a younger officer muttered. Havel didn't look away from the display. "Not hidden," he said. "Contained." Dr. Lena Cade stood beside him, watching data streams cascade upward from every continent. "They're going to think it's a weapon," the officer added. Cade finally spoke. "It is." That shut the room down. Havel exhaled. "Define weapon." Cade didn't hesitate. "Something that ends a conflict faster than the enemy can adapt." A low rumble passed through the bunker. Not an explosion. A heartbeat. Above them, the alien fleet shifted formations for the first time since arrival. Rail noticed immediately. "They're reacting," he said sharply. "To what?" an officer asked. Rail didn't answer. Because for the first time since the bombardment began, Earth's surface showed movement. Not panic. Not retreat. Coordination. Across the ruined continents, things began to rise. Not missiles. Not drones. Not conventional aircraft. Something older. Something that did not care what era it was in. In what remained of the Pacific, the ocean split briefly, not with water displacement, but with controlled collapse of pressure layers beneath it. A shape emerged, vast and angular, shedding centuries of sediment like dust. In Europe, underground silos opened, releasing machines that had never been catalogued by any surviving government database. In Africa, Deserts cracked as buried systems reactivated beneath dunes that had concealed them since before the first satellite era. And in North America, something answered the sky directly. Rail's tactical display flickered violently. "Report!" he snapped. "Multiple surface breaches detected," a technician said, voice rising. "But they're not launching weapons in orbit trajectories, they're connecting." "Connecting to what?" Rail demanded. The technician's hands trembled over the console. "To us." A beat of silence. Then another officer spoke, slower now. "Executor, our lower orbital sensor array is experiencing interference." Rail narrowed his eyes. "Define interference." The answer came seconds later. "Boarding activity." That word should not have applied in space. And yet, on the underside of one Varelian frigate, something had attached itself. Not a missile. Not debris. A person. Clinging to the hull like gravity was optional. Inside the ship, alarms erupted as external pressure spikes tore through reinforced plating. "What is that?" someone shouted. "Life form detected on exterior hull." Rail leaned forward. "Eliminate it." A pause. Then, "Executor, we cannot target it without risking hull collapse." Rail's expression tightened. "Then vent that section." Before the order could fully process, the feed changed. The thing on the hull moved. It didn't force entry. It simply found a seam that the ship had forgotten it had. And opened it. On Earth, Havel watched the same feed through a buried uplink. He closed his eyes briefly. "So it begins," he murmured. Cade didn't look away from the display. "No," she corrected. "It continues." Havel glanced at her. "You're enjoying this too much." A faint smile crossed her face. "General, they dropped kinetic glass rods on cities. I am moderating my enjoyment." Above them, the alien ship went dark for 1.7 seconds. Then came back online under new routing protocols. Rail noticed instantly. "That vessel," he said slowly. "Why is it transmitting human-coded telemetry?" No one answered. Because the answer was already appearing on screen. The ship had changed hands. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Operationally. A Varelian cruiser, once part of the invasion fleet, was now broadcasting commands that bypassed its original chain of command entirely. And those commands were not Varelian. They were human. Rail stood very still. "That is impossible," he said quietly. Then the hull breach count increased from 1 to 12. Then 30. Then entire ships began reporting internal system overrides. Something was inside the fleet. Something that should not have been able to survive vacuum exposure. Something that should not have been able to think in alien systems faster than their engineers could secure them. Rail finally spoke, voice colder than before. "Lock down the fleet." A technician hesitated. "Executor, lockdown is failing." "Why?" A pause. Then the answer came, reluctant and precise. "Because they are already inside the command layer." On Earth, Havel finally turned away from the screen. "That's faster than projected," he said. Cade nodded. "They're adapting." Havel frowned. "We didn't design them to be that fast." Cade's expression darkened slightly. "No," she said. "We designed them to survive first contact with something that wouldn't wait for them to catch up." A long silence followed that. Then Havel asked the question he clearly didn't want answered. "Are we still in control of them?" Cade looked at him for the first time. "Define we, General." Above them, the alien fleet began to fracture. Not from destruction. From reassignment. And in the middle of it all, Executor Rayo realized something deeply uncomfortable. This was not an invasion anymore. It was a system update. And Earth was not the target. It was the installer. The first thing Executor Rail understood was that the word invasion no longer applied. The second thing he understood was worse. This was not two civilizations colliding. This was one civilization discovering it had been living inside the operating system of another. The Varelian fleet was no longer unified. Ships that had been perfectly synchronized minutes ago now drifted into fractured autonomy. Command hierarchies collapsed in cascading failures, not from damage, but from reassignment of authority. Every system they built to enforce control was being politely overwritten. As if something was saying, "Thank you. We'll take it from here." "Executor," a technician said, voice tight. "We are losing fleet cohesion at exponential rate." Rael's claws tightened on the edge of the command console. "Cause?" A pause. Then, "Human origin protocols." Silence fell across the bridge. Rael turned slowly. "Explain." The technician hesitated, then brought up the data stream. At first glance, it looked like corruption. Lines of code spreading through Varelian systems like a biological infection. But it wasn't random. It was structured. Organized. Adaptive. It didn't break systems, it reinterpreted them. Rael leaned closer. "That is not possible. Their species does not have the computational architecture for fleet-scale intrusion." Another officer spoke quietly, almost unwilling to say it aloud. "Executor, it is not their species anymore." On Earth, the sky had stopped being the limit. It had become a battlefield interface. Dr. Lena Kate stood in the central command chamber, watching real-time orbital mapping shift like a living chessboard. Around her, human analysts worked in controlled silence. No shouting. No panic. Just grim efficiency. Because this wasn't their first war. It was just the first one fought in this format. General Marcus Havel entered, expression dark. "Status?" he asked. Cade didn't look up. "They're destabilizing faster than expected." Havel frowned. "That's not a complaint." "It is," she said. "We wanted them slower." He glanced at her. "Slower?" Cade finally turned. "If they collapse too fast," she said quietly, "it won't trigger full deployment." A pause. Havel's voice lowered. "And full deployment is still on the table?" Cade didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. Above them, one of the captured Varelian cruisers suddenly changed trajectory. Not drifting. Not malfunctioning. Redirecting. Rael saw it instantly. "That vessel is returning to the planetary gravity well," he said sharply. "Why would they descend into atmosphere?" No one responded. Because the tactical feed had already updated. The cruiser was no longer Varelian controlled. It was broadcasting human command signatures. And it was speaking. Not in Varelian code. In Earth standard encrypted military dialect. Rael narrowed his eyes. "Patch it through." Static. Then a voice. Calm. Male. Almost bored. "You're handling this poorly." Rael's mandibles flexed. "Identify yourself." A pause. Then, "You already know who I am." Rael studied the data feed. "General Marcus Havel." A faint chuckle came through the transmission. "Good. At least your translators work." Rael stepped forward. "Explain what you have done to my fleet." Havel's voice remained steady. "We didn't do anything to your fleet." A pause. "We just stopped pretending it wasn't ours to begin with." Rael froze slightly. Then his tone sharpened. "Impossible. You had no access to our systems before contact." Another voice entered the channel. A second human. Female. Dr. Lena Cade. "Oh, that's where you're wrong," she said lightly. "We've been studying you for years." Rael's attention narrowed. "Lies." Cade's tone shifted, less amused now. "You think first contact is when we met you?" she asked. A beat. "That's adorable." On Earth, deep beneath the command structure, something massive shifted again. Havel glanced at Cade. "They're getting nervous." Cade nodded. "Good. Nervous makes them predictable." Havel frowned. "And what makes us?" Cade looked at him. "Dangerous." In orbit, Rael finally made a decision. "Purify the planet," he ordered. A technician hesitated. "Executor, fleet assets are compromised." "I said purify it." The order propagated. But something strange happened. Only half the fleet responded. The other half did not. Instead, they began broadcasting human commands back into Varelian systems. Rael's voice dropped dangerously. They're resisting purge protocols. A pause. Then the technician whispered, Executor, they are not resisting. Another screen updated. Clarify. The technician swallowed. They are executing an override. Rael turned slowly. Whose override? The answer came immediately. Earth Origin Authority Layer, Black Harvest Protocol. Silence. That name meant nothing to the Varelians. Which was precisely the problem. Because anything you don't understand controlling your weapons system is already winning. On Earth, Havel stood very still. You triggered it, he said quietly. Cade didn't deny it. I told you, she replied. If they escalated to orbital bombardment, we escalate to containment inversion. Havel's jaw tightened. That protocol was never meant to be used. Cade finally looked at him. Neither was first contact. Above them, the Varelian fleet began to fracture in real time. Ships turned. Not randomly. Not chaotically. Strategically. Rael watched helplessly as entire wings of his armada reoriented themselves into defensive formations, not against Earth, but against each other. This is sabotage, one officer hissed. Rael shook his head slowly. No, he said quietly. This is evolution under foreign instruction. A new signal appeared on the main display. A fleet-wide broadcast. Human-coded. Unencrypted. Open. Rael stared at it. Play it. The bridge went silent. Havel's voice filled the ship again. Here's the thing you missed, he said calmly. We don't build systems that fail gracefully. A pause. We build systems that replace themselves when attacked. Rael's eyes narrowed. Cade's voice joined the transmission. And you attacked us first. A soft hum filled the line, like distant machinery waking up. Havel continued. So now you get to meet the rest of us. Rael stepped forward. There are no more of you. Cade's response was immediate. Oh, Executor. A pause. You really should have checked under the planet. On Earth, something deep beneath the crust finished aligning. And for the first time since the bombardment began, the planet itself responded. Executor Rael had commanded purges across 17 systems. He had erased civilizations that never even learned the name of their destroyer. He had never once felt uncertainty. Until Earth stopped behaving like a target. And started behaving like a countermeasure. The fleet was gone. Not destroyed in a single decisive blow, that would have been understandable. No. It was worse. It was reassigned. Entire cruisers that had been firing on the planet just minutes ago now drifted in coordinated silence, their weapons offline, their systems rewritten at the command level. Some even turned their guns inward, not in rebellion, but in obedience to a new directive that no Varelian had authored. Rael stood alone on the command bridge of the flagship Varelian Dominion, watching his empire dissolve into someone else's design. This is not warfare, he said quietly. No one responded. Because there was no fleet left to respond. Only echoes of one. On Earth, General Marcus Havel watched the orbital map stabilize into something unrecognizable. What's the status? He asked. Dr. Lena Cade didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were locked on a deep subsurface readout, something pulsing beneath the planet's crust like a heartbeat that had been waiting centuries to sync with the surface. Then she spoke. It's complete. Havel turned toward her. Define complete. Cade's expression remained unreadable. They're awake. A long silence followed that. Then Havel asked the question no one in the room wanted to hear answered. Who is they? Cade finally looked at him. The part of humanity that never agreed to lose again. Above Earth, the last coherent Varelian formation attempted retreat. It didn't get far. Because space itself was no longer neutral. The battlefield had layers now. And humanity had learned to fight in all of them. Rael's voice came through the final surviving open channel, no longer commanding, only calculating. "Human Commander," he said, voice tight. "What have you done to this planet?" Havel answered without hesitation. "We stopped treating it like it was just a planet." A pause. Then Rael asked the question that revealed everything. "What are you?" For the first time, Havel didn't respond immediately. Behind him, the bunker hummed with systems that had no names in Virelian language. Layers of defense, intelligence, adaptation loops, systems designed not just to fight an enemy, but to learn how to become the enemy's problem faster than the enemy could define itself. Cade stepped beside Havel. "We're what you get," she said softly, "when you keep trying to erase something that refuses to stay erased." Rael's tone sharpened. "We offered correction. Order. Survival." Havel's laugh was quiet and humorless. "You offered extinction with better branding." A pause. Then Rael said something unexpected. "You are not surviving." Havel frowned slightly. "Excuse me?" Rael's voice dropped lower. "You are transforming." On Earth, alarms briefly flickered across deep systems. Cade's eyes narrowed. "He sees it." Havel turned to her. "Sees what?" Cade hesitated. "The adaptation cascade?" Above them, the last Virelian flagship began to change shape. Not collapsing. Not exploding. Reconfiguring. Rael watched as his own vessel started to respond to human-coded directives embedded in its core systems. And he understood, too late, what Earth had really done. They hadn't just defended. They had infected the concept of war itself. "Stop the cascade," he ordered. A technician replied shakily. "We can't. It's recursive now. Every attempt to shut it down strengthens it." Rael's claws tightened. "Then sever the planet." A pause. Then the technician whispered. "Executor, the planet is no longer the source." Silence. Rael turned slowly. "What?" The technician pointed at the display. And for the first time, even Executor Rael felt something dangerously close to disbelief. Because Earth was not emitting the signal anymore. It was receiving it. From everywhere. From his fleet. From his systems. From his command structure. And from something deeper. Something that had always been there, waiting for an interface. On Earth, Cade exhaled slowly. "So it's doing it," she murmured. Havel looked at her. "Doing what?" Cade's voice was quieter now. "Teaching them what we learned first." Havel's expression darkened. "And what's that?" Cade finally met his eyes. "That everything can be rewritten." Above Earth, the Virelian Dominion's final systems flickered. Rael stood alone on his bridge, watching his command authority dissolve into unfamiliar protocols. He was no longer issuing orders. He was being interpreted. And then, for the first time in his existence, Executor Rael was locked out of his own ship. A new interface appeared on every surviving screen. Not alien. Not human. Something in between. And a message appeared. Simple. Final. Unavoidable. "Welcome to First Contact." Rael stared at it. Then whispered, almost to himself. "This was never contact." A pause. "It was succession." On Earth, General Marcus Havel closed his eyes for a moment. Cade didn't speak. Neither did anyone else. Because up above, the war had not ended with victory. It had ended with handover. And somewhere in the dark between stars, something wearing the shape of humanity's survival instinct took control of a fleet that once came to erase it. Not as conquerors. Not as victims. But as something far more unsettling. A species that had finally learned how to defend itself. By becoming impossible to classify as prey ever again.